From the 6-year-old who became his drug-addicted father's keeper to the daughter who ran a horse school after her ex-husband died in a scandalous train accident, Keith Richards' children have lived through unimaginable trauma and transformation. While some found peace as artists and activists, others battled demons inherited from rock's wildest dynasty, each carrying scars from a childhood spent in the eye of music's most chaotic storm. Here's what really happened to Keith Richards' children. Marlin Leon Sundeep Richards. Marlin Leon Sundeep Richards carries the distinction of being Keith Richards' firstborn child, but his story reads more like a cautionary tale than a rock star fairy tale. Born on August 10, 1969, to Keith Richards and Italian actress Anita Pallenberg, Marlin's childhood unfolded during the most chaotic and drug-fueled period of Rolling Stones history, when his parents were deep in the grip of heroin addiction and the band was at the height of their wild reputation. What makes Marlin's story particularly striking is how the typical parent-child roles became completely reversed when he was barely out of kindergarten. By age 6, this small boy had somehow become the responsible adult in a household spinning out of control. While other children his age were learning to tie their shoes, Marlin was learning to wake his unconscious father for concert performances, carefully cleaning up drug paraphernalia before police raids, and skillfully distracting law enforcement officers who came knocking on hotel room doors. When police would arrive looking for Keith, young Marlin would calmly tell them his father wasn't there, buying precious time for Keith to either hide or sober up enough to function. The extent of Marlin's unusual childhood responsibilities becomes even more remarkable when you consider that he was essentially serving as a Rolling Stones roadie before he could properly read. He learned to count by pressing elevator buttons in endless hotels around the world, and his first words were reportedly room service rather than the typical mama or dada that most children speak. This wasn't just family folklore. Marlin was literally raised on tour, traveling from city to city as his parents lived the ultimate rock and roll lifestyle without any consideration for how it might affect a developing child. Anita Pallenberg herself acknowledged the chaos of their situation years later, explaining that they were constantly on the road and that she took Marlin everywhere during those early years. She didn't send him to traditional school until he was 8 years old, instead teaching him to read and write herself, while Keith's mother looked after his sister, Angela. The family dynamic was so unstable that even Keith later admitted to the difficulties, telling reporters that it was incredibly hard on Marlin, growing up like gypsies, outlaws, and nomads with no real sense of home or stability. The situation reached a breaking point when Marlin was 9 years old and witnessed something no child should ever see. While living with his mother, he was present for the aftermath of a tragic incident where Anita Pallenberg's boyfriend shot and killed himself, an event that some believed was connected to a dangerous game of Russian roulette inspired by the film The Deer Hunter. This traumatic experience finally prompted some adults in Marlin's life to recognize that the situation had become completely untenable for a child. When Anita Pallenberg decided to move back to the United Kingdom in 1988, teenage Marlin made the surprising decision to stay behind in the United States rather than accompany his mother. By this point, Keith had met and married American model Patty Hansen. But rather than welcoming his eldest son into his new family situation, Marlin was essentially left to fend for himself. Remarkably, Marlin didn't seem to mind this abandonment, later explaining that living with both Anita and Keith had become completely exhausting for everyone involved. Despite this traumatic and unconventional upbringing that would have destroyed many people, Marlin Richards chose a completely different path from his parents' rock and roll excess. He deliberately stepped away from the spotlight and built a quiet, private life as a graphic artist and photographer. He married model Lucy de la Falaise and became a devoted father to 3 children of his own, making sure they received the stable, hands-on parenting he never experienced. Today, He lives a relatively normal life, worth an estimated $10 million, having transformed his chaotic childhood experiences into artistic vision through his work in photography and graphic design, while maintaining the kind of private family life that was impossible during his own youth. Angela Dandelion Richards. Angela Richards entered the world under a cloud of scandal that would follow her for decades. Born on April 17, 1972, during one of the most turbulent periods in Rolling Stone's history. Originally named Dandelion by her bohemian parents, Keith Richards and Anita Pallenberg, Angela's very existence became the source of bitter speculation when Keith suspected that his bandmate Mick Jagger might actually be her biological father. This suspicion arose during a period when Keith believed Anita was having an affair with Jagger, creating tension that threatened to tear apart both the band and their personal relationships. The paternity questions surrounding Angela's birth earned her the unfortunate nickname of the baby who almost broke up the Stones, as Keith's accusations against Jagger created a rift between the two songwriting partners that lasted for years. While everyone eventually accepted that Angela was indeed Keith's daughter, based on her physical resemblance to him, the damage to family relationships had already been done, and the chaos of her parents' drug-addled lifestyle made it impossible for them to provide stable care for their daughter. Rather than growing up with her famous parents in the rock and roll spotlight, Angela spent the first 20 years of her life being raised by her paternal grandmother, Doris Richards, in Dartford, Kent. This arrangement came about because both Keith and Anita were too deeply involved with heroin addiction to care for a child properly, and Keith's mother stepped in to provide the stability that Angela desperately needed. Living with her grandmother meant Angela was largely shielded from the worst excesses of her parents' lifestyle, though it also meant she grew up with limited contact with Keith and virtually no relationship with her drug-dependent mother. The separation from her parents became even more pronounced after a frightening incident when Keith fell asleep at the wheel while driving with young Marlin in the car, an event that convinced everyone that the children needed to be kept away from their father during his worst periods of drug use. Angela remained in her grandmother's care throughout her childhood and teenage years, developing a much closer relationship with Doris Richards than she ever had with her biological parents. When her grandmother passed away in 2007, Angela finally moved to a large estate owned by her father, where she established herself as the operator of a horse riding school. She had married carpenter Dominic Jennings in 1998 in a lavish ceremony that cost Keith over £250,000, held at his multi-million-pound estate in West Wittering, West Sussex. The wedding was a star-studded affair with guests including Kate Moss, Ronnie Wood, Jerry Hall, and Marianne Faithfull, with Keith proudly walking his daughter down the aisle. However, Angela's marriage to Jennings deteriorated over the years, and they separated around 2010 on what she later described as not pleasant terms. The situation became tragically complicated when Jennings struggled with alcohol and drug problems that Angela said had put him on a downward slope for the last 15 years. In July 2021, Angela faced an unimaginable tragedy when her ex-husband died after being struck by a train at Chichester Station, just 2 days after being arrested on allegations of inappropriate behavior toward children in a local park. The incident occurred after Jennings had been confronted by members of the public who posted accusations on social media, claiming he was trying to approach young girls inappropriately. Despite their bitter separation and the serious allegations against him, Angela posted a heartfelt message on social media expressing her condolences to Jennings's family, particularly his twin sister, who remained one of Angela's closest friends, demonstrating the complex emotional toll the situation took on everyone involved. Tara Jojo Gunnar Richards. Tara Jojo Gunnar Richards represents the most heartbreaking chapter in Keith Richards' complicated journey as a father, a story that demonstrates how the relentless demands of rock stardom can collide with the most fundamental human experiences of love and loss. Born on March 26, 1976, Tara was Keith's third child with Italian actress and model Anita Pallenberg, and his name carried deep meaning for his parents, who chose to honor both Tara Brown, a London socialite whose tragic death had helped inspire the Beatles' song A Day in the Life, and the Chuck Berry song Jojo Gunna. The baby's arrival should have been a moment of joy for Keith and Anita. But their lives were already spiraling into chaos due to their severe heroin addictions, and the couple was struggling to maintain any sense of stability, while Keith continued his demanding schedule with the Rolling Stones. What made Tara's brief life even more tragic was that he entered a world where his parents were barely capable of caring for themselves, let alone providing the constant attention and care that a newborn requires. The devastating tragedy struck when Tara was just 2 months old, succumbing to sudden infant death syndrome while Keith was thousands of miles away on tour with the Rolling Stones. The timing could not have been more cruel, as Keith received the phone call about his son's death while he was in Paris, with the baby having died in Geneva, creating a geographic distance that made the loss feel even more surreal and impossible to process. The shock of losing a child is unimaginable under any circumstances, but receiving such news while away from home, surrounded by the artificial environment of a rock tour, made Keith's grief even more isolating and difficult to bear. Keith's reaction to learning about Tara's death reveals both his vulnerability as a father and his complicated relationship with his role as a performer. Rather than canceling that night's concert to grieve privately, Keith made the controversial decision to take the stage and perform as scheduled, a choice that brought him significant criticism from fans and media, who felt he should have prioritized his family tragedy over his professional obligations. However, Keith later explained his reasoning during a 2015 interview on BBC Radio 4's Desert Island Discs, saying that he thought he would go mad unless he performed that night, and that if he had just sat alone with the devastating news, he didn't know what he might have done to himself. Keith described his decision as an act of self-preservation, explaining that he had a feeling the show must go on, and that he would worry, grieve, and think about the loss after the performance was over. He admitted that if he hadn't gone on stage that night, he probably would have shot himself, revealing the depth of his despair and how performing became a way to temporarily escape from unbearable emotional pain. This decision haunted Keith for decades afterward, as he struggled with whether he had made the right choice and whether he could ever forgive himself for not being present when his son needed him most. In his 2011 memoir, Life, Keith wrote that he could never forgive himself for Tara's death, and that the loss haunted him for decades after it happened. Anita Pallenberg later blamed her rampant drug use during pregnancy for contributing to Tara's tragic death, adding another layer of guilt and regret to an already devastating situation. Keith also revealed that his relationship with his eldest son, Marlin, became crucial in saving him from a complete spiral of depression following Tara's death, showing how one child's presence helped him cope with the loss of another. Theodora Dri Richards. Theodora Dri Richards grew up with what many would consider the ultimate rock and roll privilege. Born on March 18, 1985, as the first daughter of Keith Richards and supermodel Patty Hansen. Unlike her older half-siblings who endured the chaos of Keith's drug-addled years with Anita Pallenberg, Theodora experienced a more stable upbringing during Keith's marriage to Hansen, yet she still couldn't escape the rebellious genes that seemed to run in the Richards family bloodline. Named after Keith's grandfather, Theodore Augustus Dupri, Theodora inherited both her father's musical sensibilities and her mother's striking looks, which naturally led her into the modeling world at age 16. She landed high-profile campaigns with Tommy Hilfiger alongside her sister Alexandra and Elizabeth Jagger, daughter of Mick Jagger, creating a new generation of rock royalty in the fashion industry. Her modeling career included appearances in prestigious publications like Vogue and covers for magazines such as Lucire and Town and Country, establishing her as a legitimate presence in the fashion world beyond just her famous parentage. However, Theodora's seemingly charmed life took a dramatic turn in 2011 when she made headlines for all the wrong reasons, following in her father's notorious footsteps with a very public arrest that echoed Keith's own legendary run-ins with law enforcement. The incident occurred in Manhattan's trendy Soho neighborhood, where police caught the 25-year-old Theodora spray-painting graffiti on the wall of St. Anthony's Convent. The message she had written in red paint read, T-Heart A, which stood for Theodora Loves Alexandra, a sweet tribute to her younger sister that might have seemed innocent enough under different circumstances. What transformed this act of sibling affection into a serious legal matter was the subsequent discovery of marijuana and several oxycodone pills in Theodora's purse when police searched her belongings. According to reports, she even joked with the arresting officers, saying, "I hope I don't get into trouble for this," seemingly unaware of the gravity of her situation. The arrest drew immediate comparisons to Keith's own famous drug bust in 1977, suggesting that the apple hadn't fallen far from the tree when it came to the Richards family's complicated relationship with substances and authority figures. Fortunately for Theodora, prosecutors showed leniency due to her clean criminal record, and she was sentenced to just 2 days of community service, while the charges were ultimately dropped. However, this brush with the law wasn't the end of her struggles with substance abuse, as she later sought help at Connecticut's prestigious Silver Hill Hospital in 2015 to address her drug addiction. Sources reported that she initially struggled with her attitude during treatment, but eventually appeared to be in a much happier and more positive state by the time she completed the program. Despite these personal challenges, Theodora successfully reinvented herself as a media personality, launching a monthly radio show on Sirius XM called Off the Cuff, where she showcases her eclectic musical taste through interviews with celebrities like Sean Lennon, Peter Wolf, and Sheryl Crow. The show grew out of her childhood habit of creating mixtape CDs for her mother's commute into the city, blending everything from Lauryn Hill to Etta James with film score ballads. In 2024, Theodora reached a new milestone in her personal life when she welcomed her first child with partner Oscar Burnett, marking her transition from the wild child of rock royalty into motherhood, and suggesting that she has found the stability and happiness that eluded her during her younger years. Alexandra Nicole Richards. Alexandra Nicole Richards has become the most unlikely environmental crusader in rock and roll history, transforming from a teenage fashion model into a passionate ocean activist who has dedicated her adult life to fighting climate change and marine destruction. Born on July 28, 1986, as the youngest child of Keith Richards and supermodel Patty Hansen, Alexandra seemed destined for a conventional celebrity offspring career when she landed her first major modeling campaign with Tommy Hilfiger at just 14 years old, appearing alongside her sister Theodora and Elizabeth Jagger in what became an iconic campaign featuring the daughters of rock legends. Her early career followed the expected path of a rock star's daughter, with modeling work for prestigious brands including Burberry, Dior, and Abercrombie and Fitch, plus runway appearances for designers like Dolce & Gabbana, Jill Stewart, and Matthew Williamson. She graced the pages of major publications including Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Vanity Fair, and Cosmopolitan, establishing herself as a legitimate presence in the fashion world beyond just her famous parentage. However, Alexandra's life took a dramatic and unexpected turn in 2009 when she watched a documentary that would completely reshape her priorities and career trajectory. The film that changed everything was The Cove, a devastating documentary about Japan's dolphin hunting practices that exposed the brutal reality of marine life destruction happening around the world. Alexandra later explained that after seeing this film, she became determined to find a way to protect the oceans, leading her to discover Project Zero, a global nonprofit organization working to create ocean sanctuaries and raise awareness about marine conservation. She initially began DJing at Project Zero events as a way to learn more about ocean protection while contributing her musical skills to their fundraising efforts. What started as volunteer work quickly evolved into a leadership role when Alexandra joined Project Zero's board of directors in 2014, where she now oversees projects to restore and protect ocean environments worldwide. Her involvement with the organization has become a true family affair within the Rolling Stones community, as she works alongside Jimmy Jagger, son of Mick Jagger, and other children of band members who all serve as directors and ambassadors for the cause. Alexandra has explained that many of the Rolling Stones' offspring spent their youth together on beaches around the world while their fathers toured, creating a shared, profound love and respect for the ocean that naturally led them all toward marine conservation work. Alexandra's activism goes far beyond just lending her name to the cause, as she has fundamentally restructured her career around environmental advocacy. She transitioned from modeling into DJing, but instead of pursuing typical nightclub work, she uses her DJ skills to curate events for environmental organizations and brands committed to sustainability. She has performed at music festivals like Governor's Ball and Secret Solstice, while consistently using these platforms to educate audiences about climate change and ocean protection. Her environmental commitment extends into her personal life as well, as she has become increasingly conscious about sustainable living practices since announcing her pregnancy with husband Jacques Naudet, a visual artist and filmmaker. Alexandra has spoken about how becoming a parent has made her even more attentive to the products they use, the food she eats, and their overall environmental impact, as she wants to ensure her daughter grows up understanding the importance of protecting the planet and living with minimal environmental impact.